Welcome back. When I was a kid, I went to Scott's Pet Shop, which I think was in Westchester, and I met a guy there. Was one of the runners of the pet shop. And my mother told me that I had to meet him because she said that his dad or his uncle or his brother was killed on the USS Arizona. Now, for those who are unaware, the USS Arizona was one of the battleships that was bombed. It exploded. It sunk on the morning of December 7th, 1941. Now, December 7th, 1941 is typically marked as the date in which the United States gets involved in World War II. Now, the war itself had begun for a while before that. If you're in Europe, the date is usually looked at as being in September of 1939. If you're looking at actions in Asia and across the Pacific, the date would be even earlier. Remember, Japan was relatively supportive of the Allies during World War I. They had kind of come onto the scene and gained recognition by the West with their defeat of Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, their colonization of Korea, and their desire to build, what they called the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. They viewed themselves as imperial actors in their own right across Asia, and wanted to acquire resources and territory to, back that up. Now, by the 1920s, there had been political turmoil in Japan, to put it mildly, and by the early part of the 1930s, you saw a separation with the Imperial Japanese Army and the Imperial Japanese Navy to be able to carry out military actions across China or Manchuria independently. You also had this feeling on the part of the Japanese that the West's power conferences, treaty conferences in the 1920s still, to a certain extent, relegated them to a second-party status or third-rate status. And there was this feeling on the part of the Japanese military command structure that they could achieve these imperial gains primarily in China. Now, following the action in Manchuria in the early 1930s, the Japanese military had planned a strategy to begin executing by 1937 called, in English, the Hold North, Go South strategy. And this involved a much larger invasion of China, with the idea being that they would have certain metrics to complete with their invasion, that if they did not complete them after a set period of time, they would be shifting the focus of their military forces. Now, shifting the focus of their military forces would involve attacking colonies and territories that were allied or were held by European powers as well as the United States. The attack at Pearl Harbor on December 7th was a terrible day. It was a tragedy, but it was also something that potentially had been in the works for years. And that's what happens. So the Japanese invasion of China is undertaken. It is very brutal. The capital, Nanjing, is devastated. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese people are brutally murdered, particularly civilians, particularly women and children. The use of rape as a weapon of war is used here, and it is violent and it is terrible. And by 1940, 1941, the war in Europe is raging, and the Japanese military has not achieved the metrics for success that they're looking for. And so by late fall 1941, the decision is made to carry out these attacks. Now, again, Pearl Harbor is one of a number of different targets that the Japanese military will attack in December of 1941 and in January of 1942. Remember, much of the American fleet is based there at Pearl, but you do have a significant American presence in the Philippines. You have a significant British presence in Singapore. Hong Kong is significant as well. So you have a number of different areas that are going to be targeted for assault. Now, we should get a couple things out of the way with the attack on Pearl Harbor, though, to end this. One, does President Roosevelt know that the Americans are going to get attacked on the morning of December 7th? And does he hide it from the public so the Americans can enter the war? No. All evidence that we have says that the Americans thought something could happen. Pearl Harbor could be a target, but they didn't know it would happen right at that time, right at that date, and then and there. Roosevelt thought the Japanese might try to attack us, and, we dropped the ball on this. Now, it is after that attack, though, that the United States will begin its efforts in World War II in earnest, which will be the subject of more of these lectures. Thank you so much.